The last we heard of Joseph was that he interpreted 2 prisoners' dreams, but was then forgotten about. Then 2 full years later, we hear the next part of the story. At this point, Pharaoh has 2 similar dreams. Firstly, 7 beautiful fat cows come out of the Nile River, followed by 7 ugly and skinny cows. The skinny cows eat the fat cows, but even after that, they look just as skinny as before. And he has a similar dream, a second one, with 7 scrawny heads of grain eating the 7 healthy heads that they came after, and yet they stay scrawny. Pharaoh found these dreams really troubling, and so in the morning he sent for anyone who might be able to interpret the dreams. Magicians, wise men, you name it, they were there. But none of them knew what these dreams meant. In amongst the crowd was the cupbearer. The one who had been thrown into prison had had that dream and had been restored to his position. This situation with Pharaoh has jogged his memory, and he remembered that Hebrew man who had correctly interpreted both his dream and the baker's dream when he said what would happen. In an instant, Joseph was brought up from the dungeon. Genesis 41:15-17 says, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream you can interpret it. I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answers he desires. And Pharaoh described the dreams of the 7 fat cows, the 7 skinny cows, the 7 healthy grains, and the 7 scrawny grains, the skinny ones eating the fat ones and looking just as thin afterwards. God revealed the meaning to Joseph, who tells Pharaoh that there are 7 years of abundance coming in the land of Egypt, but after that there will be 7 years of famine, so severe that the abundance will be forgotten. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms was because the matter had been firmly decided by God, and God would carry it out soon. So Joseph says to Pharaoh that he must look for a wise leader, someone who can store up a portion of the grain for the next 7 years, and then to keep it for when they really need it in the years of famine to come, so that the country will not go to ruin. Verse 39-40 says, Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people will submit to your orders. With only respect to the throne will I be greater than you. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This man certainly knows how to bounce between the highs and lows of life. Forgotten in a dungeon, it had been 2 years. The cupbearer had clearly not remembered the promise to put a good word in for Joseph when he was restored to his position. I remember the first time I noticed that it was 2 years between this story and the last. 2 years. It takes about 5 minutes to read these stories, probably an hour to read the whole story of Joseph. And because of that, we so often overlook these stories that span decades, and that the people we read about who lived in these circumstances for years, not just the minutes it takes to read. I want to take note of Joseph's character. At no point does he become bitter or angry, but he stays consistent. He doesn't let others' selfishness, falsehood and lies corrupt his character. Time and time again he gets dealt a horrible hand, and time again he remains consistent. Clearly the responsibilities he took up in prison hadn't got him out any earlier either, and yet he continued to be trustworthy. How consistent are our characters? Are you a person of integrity, irrespective of the context that you find yourself in? Do you choose to be godly even when it feels like God is taking his sweet time? We live in such a corrupt society. People are selfish, taking what is not theirs, often at the expense of those who are already struggling. How different our country, our world would be if people chose to be honorable on good days and bad days. It's so tempting to think that we should just take a shortcut. It really doesn't matter. Everyone's doing it. But we will see with Joseph how it took some time, but ultimately he was seen as a trustworthy man all the way through life. Even those who would have been considered him an enemy couldn't deny that he was a man of integrity. He was put second in charge of part of his house, and then in charge of the prison by the warden, and then second in charge of Egypt. Joseph was faithful, and we see God honoring that. Furthermore, Joseph never takes the credit when it's not his to take. He makes Pharaoh very aware that it's not him, but God who interprets the dreams. Joseph, what a man! We certainly have a lot to learn from him and how he reacts to all that life throws at him. Let us pray. God, we have so much to learn from Joseph. Help us to be consistent. Help us not to be tempted nor corrupted by status, power, or money, but rather may we be people who reflect you and your glory, irrespective of the circumstances that we find ourselves in. Amen.